I will now read a piece called Good Night Melody, which is in my book, which I have produced many articles on prisoners of war of the Japanese. And I need to set the scene somewhat, that this was given to me by Private Milton Fairclough, or generally known as Snow Fairclough, who was a member of the 2nd 3rd Machine Gun Battalion captured on Java. And it is the record of a portion of a concert, which was held on the eve of Armistice Day 1943, just 8 months after they had been prisoners of war. Snow Fairclough, along with another fellow named Sturtridge, who was a member of the 2nd 4th Machine Gun Battalion and had ended up on Java, had been taught shorthand by a warrant officer, Dave Topping. They were at this concert and they both decided to test their shorthand ability and recorded this recitation in shorthand and later converted it to longhand. Now further, that was just background, let me set the scene, and I'll read. Picture several hundred British, Dutch and Australian prisoners of war who had been 8 months in captivity at this time. The concert followed a fairly stereotyped pattern, with songs, recitations, skits, with lads dressed up as lasses, causing the predictable catcalls, wolf whistles and bawdy, ribald comments. The British compere came to the front of the improvised stage and began to speak in a beautifully modulated voice. Comment. His first words were almost drowned out by the continuous shouts, etc. from the audience. Now the recitation. This is the orchestra at Tanjung Priok Prisoners of War Camp playing Good Night Melody. And this is your naughty little compere saying good night to our friends all over the place. Tomorrow is November the 11th, and we are hoping that our friends will be thinking of us on this day, as we are thinking of them. Here in captivity there is little that we can do but think, except occasionally to remember that we are British. So on this Memorial Day, for the sake of those who have laid down their lives for the Empire in past generations, we will make this resolve. We will bow, but not bow lower than is necessary. A comment. By now the noise from the audience had diminished somewhat, so he continued. So, good night from Priok prison camp to our friends who sail on the seas. We will not mind waiting for a long time yet, if we can know that our sailors are getting the food home to our old country. So good night and good luck, sailors. Keep sailing. Good night to the flying men of the Air Force. We have had plenty of time to think, back to September 1940, and we want you to know that we have not forgotten. And we assure you that we will keep looking to the south sky, hopefully. Good night, good luck, and keep flying. A comment. The noise from the audience was now barely a whisper. The commentator or the narrator continued. Good night to our Empire soldiers everywhere. We are sorry that we can do nothing here, but we still believe in you. Good night and good luck. Good night to doctors, nurses, and Red Cross workers everywhere. Good night, God bless you, and God guide your steady hands, that you are doing so much to relieve the suffering which is the inevitable consequence of a nation pitting the strength of its machines of destruction against those of another nation. Good night to lighthouse keepers, coast guards, observer corps, and all those who work and watch silently in the night. The limelight does not fall on you, but we will not forget. Good night, keep watch. Good night to all air wardens, firemen and fire watchers, ambulance drivers, blood donors and munition workers. We know that you, in your own way, are producing the answer. Another comment. There was now silence and not a stir amongst those present. Good night to mothers everywhere. Mothers whose mental anguish is causing the deeper suffering that only a mother can know. Mothers who pray for their sons, mothers who mourn for their fallen sons, and mothers who neither pray nor mourn, but wonder with soul-destroying anxiety if their son lives or rots in a corner of a foreign field. Good night, mothers. Keep praying. Good night to wives everywhere. Wives who will listen hopefully for the postman's footsteps. Wives who are separated by thousands of miles from the men they have chosen to love. Wives whose faith is not shaken after a year's silence, saying to themselves, he will come back, he must come back. Good night, children everywhere. Good night, kiddies. Little boys and girls who wonder why there is no big man who plays bears and elephants. No gruff-voiced man who used to like having his hair pulled, even if mummy says, it's you who spoils the child, and pretends to look stern. No dear, don't play with your little wooden soldiers tonight. Not tonight, of all nights. It sort of reminds mummy of your daddy's uniform, and then you won't understand why she stands with her back to you by the sideboard with two silent tears that fall down her cheeks. So good night, little fellows. Be a good boy and go to bed early tonight and say a little prayer in your bed for the return of the man who used to play bears with you. Good night, children. God bless you. Good night, listeners everywhere. Java prisoners of war say, good night to you all. Comment. There was a deathly still over the camp for some time. Hardened men were wiping their eyes. Some were sobbing unashamedly, but there was deafening applause. That concludes the recitation. As I mentioned before, this was provided to me by Snowfair Clow, and it is also mentioned in the book written by the person I've just interviewed, Dr. Captain Les Poidevin. It is mentioned in his book called Samurais and Circumcisions, and in 2003 an address of Goodnight Melody was done by a former prisoner of war, Mr. Neville Jetson, in Launceston. Neville has given his permission for me to recite this piece of prose,